Today I'm going to be making a recipe for you from Shauna Sever's wonderful book, Midwest Made. And the recipe that I'm going to be making for you is called the donut loaf. Like a loaf cake that is made very similar in taste and texture to a powdered donut. The first thing that I wanted to show to you that I did was I took my 9x5 glass loaf pan, you can use metal as well if you'd like, and I lined it with parchment paper. I first sprayed it with some cooking spray, and then I cut 2 strips of parchment paper. One going this way, which is underneath this one that is going this way. I cut them this way so that they would fit, and I'll be able to lift out the donut loaf after it has baked. Now you want to make sure that you have enough on either side or both sides so that you can really lift that out while it is still warm so that it can cool on the rack. Now we're going to combine our dry ingredients. 2 3/4 cups or 352 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour here. And to that, I'm going to add 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, a teaspoon of table salt. You can use fine sea salt as the recipe calls for, and then I have a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. There is buttermilk in this recipe. The baking soda is going to react with that buttermilk, and it's going to provide that nice little bit of lift that we need in our cake. And it also, of course, works great with the baking powder too. So I'm just going to sift this all together. Another ingredient that I'm going to add to my flour and dry ingredients is freshly grated nutmeg. Nutmeg is really what gives this recipe its donut-like taste, but you don't want to just go for your regular ground nutmeg that you can buy off of the spice rack. You want to use fresh nutmeg for this recipe. It makes all the difference in the world. Now, I've started grating. I need 2 teaspoons, and I've started grating my nutmeg. So you can see this one's already pretty much a goner, but I'm going to finish it. But I do want to show you what a fresh nutmeg looks like. It's just this nice little round, looks like a little nut that you'd see the squirrels hoarding away. And no doubt squirrels maybe have gotten their hands on nutmeg before, but they're usually covered with this really stretchy looking coating, which is another spice called mace. And usually the mace is taken off and used for its own purposes, and then the nutmeg is left on its own. So I need another teaspoon of nutmeg. So I'm just going to put that aside for a minute, and I'm actually going to use this microplane grater, which you've probably seen used for lemon zest before. And then I'm just going to go ahead right over my bowl that I've already grated here, and I'm going to grate some more fresh nutmeg. Here we go. There's 1 and 2, and whisk that right in with your flour. Perfect. Next step, into my mixing bowl here, I have 14 tablespoons of softened butter. I use unsalted butter for all of my baking. It's up to you if you want to use salted. Just maybe adjust the salt in your recipe accordingly. I'm going to turn this on. To this, I am adding 3/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons, that's 175 grams of granulated sugar. Put this right here. I'm going to let this cream for 3 minutes, and whenever a recipe says to cream butter and sugar together, it is really important that you do follow that amount or that timing to the letter because you really want that butter and sugar to cream up nicely. So I'm going to come back in about 3 minutes and we'll proceed to the next step. Okay, I've creamed my butter for 3 minutes, and now I'm going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Make sure you turn down your mixer while you do this, because otherwise you'll splash your wonderful precious liquid gold vanilla all over the place, which this stuff's expensive, so you don't want to waste that. I could have added this too with my sugar at the beginning, which is what the recipe says, but it's totally fine that I'm adding it now. And then the recipe says to add 1/4 cup of the flour the flour mixture that you've whisked together. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. Then we're going to add our eggs. If you need to have your eggs come to room temperature and you've just taken them out of the fridge, that is totally fine. Just soak them in a bowl of warm water and they'll get to room temperature in no time. I'm going to do this one at a time. I'm a firm believer in cracking eggs, not over the batter, because you might end up with some eggshell in it, but doing it in a separate bowl. And after the first one has blended into the batter pretty well, you can go ahead and add the second one. And finally, add the third. And use that bowl and collect all of your broken eggshells to throw in the garbage. It's always good to have a little junk bowl on hand. And I'm also going to scrape down the sides of my bowl as well as my beater. It's really important that you don't forget the beater. And if nobody objects, you can totally use your own finger because it's a little bit easier as long as you have clean hands to kind of get in those crevices there. The reason I say it's important to make sure you get the beater as well is if you do not scrape off that beater, you might have some chunks of butter and sugar that are not creamed as well that get stuck in there, and you really don't want that to bake into your finished cake. It'll leave strange little pockets in the batter. You don't want that. So I'm going to let this beat up a little bit longer till all of the eggs are incorporated, and then we'll add our flour mixture. Okay, I'm going to give this one more scrape down before we start adding our flour. It's looking good already. And then I'm going to gradually add my flour mixture, beginning and ending with the flour, because what we're going to do is we're going to alternate this with 1 cup of room temperature buttermilk. Now, buttermilk works really great in this recipe because it keeps the cake moist, but it also adds a nice little bit of a tangy flavor to the cake, which is exactly what you're going to want. Now, I don't have too much dry ingredients left, so I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of that buttermilk. And then I'm going to add the rest of this flour, but you'll notice I turned off the mixer because, as Shauna mentions in her recipe, from here on in, you're going to want to do a hand mix. So excuse my finger again here, but it is a clean tool, my friends, and it really cleans off these KitchenAid beaters really nicely. So just kind of clean that off. And then you're going to just take the rest of the dry ingredients and just fold this in by hand. And the reason that I'm folding this in by hand is because we don't want this batter to get too overworked. We want it to be nice and tender in this cake. And if I keep beating it in my mixer, then it's just going to get tough. So I'm going to continue folding this in, and then I'll show you how I put this into the loaf pan. All right, I have preheated my oven to 325 degrees. My batter is all prepared and ready to go, and my pan is as well. This batter is quite thick, which is totally fine. And I'm just going to dollop this into the loaf pan like so. Again, this is a 9x5 pan. It's a pretty standard size cake pan. And then when I get all of this in here, I'm just going to take my offset spatula and smooth it out so it bakes nice and smooth on the top. So here's my offset spatula, which is probably one of my favorite tools in my kitchen. I love it. And then I'm just going to spread this like so. I don't mean to bump my camera there. You don't need to be too fancy as you are spreading this. Just do the best job you can. It's going to bake up wonderfully in your oven. You'll notice that I did kind of get past my parchment paper here. I could have left those a little bit longer, but never fear, I do have these two handles on the side, so I should still be able to lift the loaf out of the pan after it has baked. So I'm going to just clean that little bit off, smooth that on, make sure it's nice and even. And now I'm going to pop this into the oven for 60 to 75 minutes until a cake tester in the center tests done. So we'll come back when this is baked off and I'll show you what's next. Well, my donut loaf is out of the oven. I've let it cool for about 15 minutes in the pan, and then I took it out using the parchment sides, let it cool for about 30 more minutes until it's about ready to handle. Now what I've done here is I've taken about a cup of powdered sugar and sieved it over a rimmed baking sheet. So this is the fun part. This is when we make it look like a donut, a powdered donut. I have 2 tablespoons of melted butter. I'm going to dip my pastry brush in it here. And then I'm going to pick up my loaf and I'm going to hold it upside down like this. And then I'm going to brush gently some of this melted butter all over the bottom of the loaf. And once I've completely covered that bottom, I'm going to go ahead and set that right down in my powdered sugar. And then the powdered sugar is just going to soak right into that. So then I'm going to continue buttering the loaf on the sides. And then once I have that side done, I'm going to plop it over. And I'm going to cover that side. While that's sitting there covered, I am buttering this other long side. And then I'm going to take that and flop that over on this side. And feel free to just go ahead and scoop some of the powdered sugar up and pat it on with your hands just to make sure that it's completely covering the bread loaf, or I should say cake loaf. This doesn't really need to be perfect. That's the beauty of a powdered sugar donut. It's just nice and covered and delicious. So I'm going to continue with buttering each side of my loaf. So I have these 2 shorter ends to go, and then I'm going to butter the top and sprinkle and powder the top as well. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to sieve some more powdered sugar over it one more time to make sure it's good and covered. So yesterday I made the donut loaf for you, and after I had decorated it, it fell apart on me. So the cake that I made yesterday is not the one that you're going to see today. I made another one so I could shoot a better result for you, and I have it here. Here we are. Here is the finished donut loaf. This is what it should roughly look like. It won't be falling apart on you, but I will confess that the reason it fell apart on me was that I didn't allow it plenty of time to cool. So make sure that when you make your donut loaf, you do follow the recipe at the end where it says allow 15 minutes, take it out of the pan, and then allow 30 minutes, a full 30 minutes, until it's pretty much completely cool before you brush it with butter and then decorate it with the powdered sugar. Another thing that I found too is that it worked much easier to just sieve the powdered sugar over each side as you were as you're decorating it, rather than tipping it so much on the sheet pan as I demonstrated yesterday. So you might want to give that a try instead. So now that we have our beautiful donut loaf here, I'm going to cut into it so we can see what it looks like. It's so powdery, it's just like a powdered donut. Oh, that looks fantastic. I do know for a fact from the crumbs that I ate yesterday that it does taste just like a powdered donut. Here is your delicious and tasty donut loaf. Thank you to Shauna Sever for this fantastic recipe. I am really looking forward to cutting into this more and having a piece of this with my morning coffee. If you'd like the recipe, make sure that you follow the link below that I'm posting to where you can purchase Shauna Sever's book, Midwest Made, and make a donut loaf for yourself.